President Trump tried to redo Minneapolis and San Diego. Do you have a plan for that?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah.
If all 5,100 empty homes that exist in the city of San Diego came back on the market, there were no more empty homes, that would be a great outcome.
This seems to be a level of dissatisfaction. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm willing to do tough things, and I'm willing to tell the public the truth. And they're probably not used to that.
Hi everyone, welcome to the San Diego Politics Show. I'm your host, Matt Strabone, and you are in for a good one today. To start us off, my co-host, the editor of the Times of San Diego, and a man who definitely owns more than one shirt, Andrew Keatts, will interview Todd Gloria, the mayor of San Diego. And if that wasn't enough, I will be speaking with Mayor Rosas, one of the authors of the upcoming empty homes tax ballot measure that San Diegans will be voting on in June. And then we'll wrap things up. Enjoy the show.
My name is Andrew Keatts. I'm the GM and editor of Times of San Diego, and I'm here for this week's interview with none other than the mayor of San Diego, Mayor Todd Gloria. Mayor Gloria, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So we are on the dawn of draft budget release, not too far off at this point. Right after the election in 2024, when Measure E failed, sales tax measure, you held a press conference. You announced a bunch of immediate spending cuts to help get ahead of that budget cycle. And then in your State of the City a few months later, you said, this is the year that we end the structural budget deficit. Why do you think that didn't happen?
Well, we fell just a bit short, right? So we did address roughly 270 plus million of that structural deficit. It means there's about 100, 120 left to go. I think the reason that didn't occur is, one, this is tough stuff, and the council and the public grapple with the reductions that are necessary or the revenue increases that are necessary to actually achieve that balance. I think secondarily, we are subject to the same cost pressures that anyone has, rising utilities, fuel, et cetera. Those are borne by the city as well. So when you couple those things together, we don't have a $320 million budget deficit this year. We have a $120 million budget deficit this year. And the goal remains to try and eliminate that, acknowledging all things I just said are also true this year. But the way I've tried to present it to the city council is that we can tackle this year and then spend the remaining 2 years that most of us will still be at City Hall, hopefully rebuilding the organization with the priorities that we share as a group. The alternative is to continue to cut year after year after year, and that doesn't have a lot of appeal for me. I don't think it has a lot of appeal for them, and it surely doesn't have a lot of appeal for the public who is relying upon these services. Yeah,
it wasn't just cuts, though. There were, as you mentioned, a lot of fee increases, a lot of things that were, each individually small, but in aggregate certainly hit people's in cost of living, which was already a significant concern. That being the case, were you surprised by the level of backlash that came from city residents over those fee increases?
No, I think it was very predictable. But what I was doing was what the council directed me to do. You may recall, very clear, we will not entertain cuts until you address every revenue option that is available. And we did that. Many, or actually even more than was actually implemented, were in the budget that they adopted, the one that we went back and forth on in terms of line item vetoes. And then as each one got passed, you saw the margins getting narrower and narrower so that the budget could be adopted on, I believe, a 7-2 vote. Many of these new revenue options were passing 5-4. And that really speaks to the frustrations that they felt, to the public that they were hearing from. These things are predictable. In the case of Balboa Park parking, that happened to be the last one, and I think in many ways, became a focal point. But you asked the question, am I surprised by that? No. I was the council member for District 3. I supported the Jacobs plan for Balboa Park that also envisioned paid parking. Very controversial, was not implemented. Was not surprising that sort of smaller version of it, which was very controversial, would be even more so when implementing park-wide.
Do you stand by that being an appropriate approach that you and the council arrived at, which was let's maximize every revenue possibility that we can before we start exploring cuts? With the experience of having gone through it for a year, seeing this sort of backlash, finding ways to delay or being forced to delay based on sort of logistical problems, was that still the right approach, putting so much of that burden on people's pocketbooks?
Well, I was always favoring a balanced approach. And I would argue that is what we've done. One of the regrets I have is that the focus and attention on the revenue increases was so extreme that it caused people to look past the many reductions, efficiencies that we took. Eliminating $30 million in outside contracts, eliminating 13 different city departments, eliminating lots of positions, most of them vacant, but some of them not. Even eliminating senior management positions, including the chief operating officer at the city of San Diego. Mm-hmm. People seem to look past that and they talk solely about the revenue. And part of their frustration is the belief that we did nothing to tighten our belt, that this was solely done through fee increases. It's a bit more balanced than that. I might have preferred an even more balanced approach, but again, the direction was extremely clear. We had council members saying very specifically, we will not entertain any cuts until you exhaust every revenue option that was available to you. I think it's fair to say that we did that. Mm-hmm. And unsurprisingly, in this year's budget process, the council has been equally as clear in the opposite direction. They're not interested in new revenue. They want to do this presumably only through cuts, because if it's not revenue, it's going to be cuts. And we'll see if they're able to hold true to that through the process.
Well, is there an insight in sort of that experience from what the public responded to that maybe, in spite of what maybe people might have thought, they're telling you, we care more about these fee increases, we care more about the ways you're raising revenue than we do about maintaining the services, that they would actually rather see some of those cuts rather than pay more, but every time they go to a Petco Park or they go to Balboa Park or they use a rec center, something like that. Is there a revealed preference suggesting that there's more interest in cutting city services than you would have expected?
No, because I think that if we had gone the all cuts approach last year, you and I would be sitting here talking about the public's outrage at the reductions to public safety, to road repair, to some of the services that they rely on. Even the cuts that we did put into place were not well received. Reductions to arts and culture, to library hours, to rec center hours. Some of those were restored, not the full cut, but people remain frustrated by that. I think those revenue increases managed to help mitigate some of those reductions, but if it was reversed, we would be sitting here talking about how could you ever have browned out fire stations. And by the way, I was part of a city council where we did brown out fire stations. I remember the opposition from the public and the anger in the public. I think what San Diego, myself and the council, as well as the public writ large, is grappling with is the fact that there is no easy option. After decades of low revenues and high services, my predecessors very successfully managed to kind of keep it going through a variety of methods that are no longer available to us. And in many ways, the bills are coming due, and we are the folks that are here to fix it, and that is what I'm intending to do. When I say I want to solve the structural budget deficit, truth is, you've been a reporter in this town for a long time. You've never had a mayor sit with you and talk about how flush we are with cash. We've always been in this position, but I'm not willing to underfund the pensions. I don't want to see massive reductions to public safety that make us unsafe. I'd like us to pave more roads, and as a consequence, whatever we do has to be a balance. It can't be all of one or the other.
Coming on the ballot in June, the tax on second homes, vacant second homes. First of all, do you support that measure? And second of all, what does it mean that so many of the other potential revenue measures that people had been exploring have either had to be delayed or they have kind of sort of fallen apart?
Well, to your first question, I think that where the council ended up after an initial rejection of a broader fee is a reasonable place to land. We are in the middle of an affordable housing crisis, much in the way that I feel like any shelter bed that the taxpayers in this city pay for ought to be filled every night. In the middle of a housing affordability crisis, every home ought to be utilized as much as we can. And this is one way that it will surely help with that. But I think the independent budget analyst has been clear, and I'm listening listening very closely, this will likely be a diminishing revenue source over time as the objective of the policy is achieved, which is to return more homes to residential use. That said, I did share with the author and with other folks, listen, the public has clearly shared that they are frustrated by fee increases. You all have told me through your budget memos you don't want any more fee increases, so this does seem a bit inconsistent. I think the council moved forward with it because they recognize at the end of the day the public gets to vote on this, and they'll be the ones that get to decide whether or not this happens. But
are you going to vote for it?
I will vote for it, yeah. But what I want to be clear about is that and any other proposed revenue source via the ballot will not be a part of my fiscal year 2027 budget. We will not be balancing this budget on expected future revenues that may or may not arrive. So whether it's the council or the public or some stakeholder interest group, let me be clear. If it's successful, great. We'll put that in at the mid-year and hopefully pave some more roads and house some more homeless people. But this will not be how we balance this year's budget. The council has been clear through their memos and through their rhetoric. They want a budget that does not include new revenue. That is what I will give them this spring.
You coined a term a few years ago at Voice of San Diego in an op-ed, the San Diego Special. There are a couple that are really classic cases that are beginning to gain momentum in your administration. One is Midway Rising, sort of losing a court case and getting bounced up to the Supreme Court and having the Supreme Court turn it down is classic San Diego Special material. Are you optimistic? Are you confident that this legal theory that you'll be able to move forward with that project despite the height limit increase in that area being thrown out in court? Are you optimistic that you'll still be able to build that project?
I am. Yeah. I am. I'm not even optimistic, I'm confident. And we have to, Andy. I mean, to your point, part of that term for your viewers who, this is this notion that we always talk about a convention center expansion, a new airport, these things that are continually in the dialogue that we never get to resolution on. We will get to resolution on this, and I believe it'll be a positive one. One, because the voters of San Diego have affirmed it twice. Yes, there have been legal challenges, no question, but I do believe that we have
legal
multiple
rulings.
Yeah, and I mean, we could spend a whole segment talking about some of that. It is frustrating, but we do live in California, and plenty of people are going to protect what they believe is theirs against what they feel is a loss. But ultimately, what is to be gained is a new arena, thousands of homes that are desperately needed, 2,000 of which are deed restricted affordable, 14 acres of public park, and an improvement to a neighborhood that desperately needs it. I don't think anyone, even the opponents of this project, believe the status quo in the Midway is acceptable. And for all of those reasons, I believe that we have multiple paths to get to success, and I'm not going to give up on this.
Is this still going to be something that comes for a vote to the City Council in 2026?
I believe it'll be in the spring.
The spring. You believe Midway Rising will be up for a vote this spring?
That is the timeline we're working on. Obviously, things can happen, but generally speaking, I feel pretty optimistic that timeline.
Including the final lease negotiations, or that would be later.
I mean, those are happening as we speak.
The Unsafe Camping Ordinance. Do you believe that has been as impactful as you indicated it would be when you were pushing for it?
By all accounts, yes.
By all accounts. I was just in a meeting with lots of downtown residents this morning who do not agree that it has made a significant difference downtown. That believe there are lots of encampments still around Post Office. There's lots of encampments. 17th Street still has many encampments. I think it would be safe to say that there are fewer encampments, but there remains plenty of people who live on city sidewalks downtown, despite that ordinance being on the books.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I live in downtown as well. So whatever their lived experience is mine as well. And I can say, as someone who walks their dog and goes to the grocery store, my experience in 2026 is not what it was in 2020, 21, 22, or 23 when we passed this. Why did that happen? Well, it's two things. And I think this is very much similar to the budget conversation where people want to focus on the revenue and fee increases and not so much on the cuts. The focus often in this conversation is about the Unsafe Camping Ordinance, overlooking and sometimes whistling past the expansion in shelter that we did at the same time, specifically our safe sleeping sites. When combined together—
Which did coincide also with lots of losses of other traditional shelter beds. So it was, to some extent, it was sort of filling in a loss that would have otherwise.
I wouldn't agree with that, and I think we have the data to back that up. The net gain over my time as mayor is fairly significant. I think once the convention center closed as the interim shelter that it was, the city was hovering around 1,000 beds across our system. Today, we're well north of over 2,000 shelter beds, safe sleeping sites, and parking spaces to serve this community. When they come into care, we're able to get them generally on their way to something better. And so those two things combined have made a difference. Is it perfect? No. In no American city is it perfect. And a frustration I typically have is that when the criticism is directed towards the city with whatever we may not be doing or to people's liking, there's very rarely consideration of what the folks who have the responsibility for mental illness and addiction, which is not the city of San Diego. And when they are falling short of their responsibilities, for whatever reason, the focus turns to the city. Here's the deal. When you're having someone who's in active mental crisis and they're not being cared for by clinicians, largely because the responsible entity is absent, who becomes responsible is the police department. And that is not appropriate. That is not okay. But for those residents you're talking to, the answer can't be, we're not going to do anything. And so we are where we are. But my numbers, the Regional Task Force on the Homeless shows a 14% reduction from last year to this year with regard to homeless population in our city. Their new numbers will be out shortly. I'm optimistic that they'll continue to show a downward trajectory. The Downtown San Diego Partnership, at the height of our homelessness crisis, said over 2,000 people were sleeping on the streets of San Diego. The most recent numbers I saw was below, I believe, 800 or 700. Let me be very clear. That is still way too many. But is it what it was in 2023? No. And am I committed to continuing to push that number down? Absolutely. And I'm doing this, by the way, over often the objections of folks who don't want shelters in their neighborhoods, who don't want more housing in their community, and who resist our efforts, whether it's in Sacramento to reform our mental health laws or locally pushing the county of San Diego to get in the game and help these very sick people. Otherwise, it's left to me, our sanitation department, our police department, and we surely can do better than that.
In places like around the post office downtown, there's a multi-block area that continues to be a place where lots and lots of people live. Why, in spite of having an unsafe camping ordinance, is unsafe camping still fairly common downtown?
Well, again, less common, but
yeah.
To your question,
but less common, but nonetheless something that you can still see without trying very hard to find it.
Fair. To your question, unlike what opponents of that legislation might suggest, this is not as simple as you see a tent, you can go and snatch it. We have a process that we have to follow. There's a notification. It is multiple hours and days. There are multiple interactions with individuals. If you were the target of a complaint, we'd have to come, we educate you. We at least 3 touches before there can be any kind of punitive effort. So it does take time, and that is what this has shown, is that over time we've been able to bring the numbers down. If I was sitting here telling you mission accomplished, I think you would rightly criticize me. What I am sitting here saying is that we've made progress. We have to do more. I continue to lobby at the county, state, and federal level for more help. Even in the midst of a significant budget crisis, we continue to divert or commit a substantial amount of city resources to this particular issue. But we need other folks to get in the game. I point out that when cities like ours engages in this issue, and take the issue of vehicles in our beaches, people living out of their cars, at Mission Bay and other places, a lot of folks are very upset about that. And when we establish the city's largest safe parking lot, we get sued by adjacent businesses who don't want that there. But simultaneously, we get sued by folks who are living in their vehicles. And so the city is stuck in the middle. And I share that to share that in and of itself is one thing, but what the message that is sent to mayors, and there are 17 other in this county, most of whom who do nothing on homelessness, even though they have populations that are often increasing themselves, that if they just sort of Homer Simpson, disappear into the hedge, that you're not going to call them. Their residents aren't going to have to oppose a shelter that gets proposed in their neighborhood, and they can simply say, go downtown, that's where your services are. That has been our approach in this county for decades, and the city's taxpayers have been paying that bill for all this time.
A quick word. We are trying our best to cut through the noise. If you're still here, you are exactly who we want watching this show. So please, click the subscribe button to help us continue on our journey to give you the very best San Diego politics content.
All right, I've got a couple more for you.
Yeah.
So like you said, I've been a reporter in this town for a long time. City politics, city policy, not always a popular issue. When I mean popular, I mean not really something that a lot of people pay close attention to, right? It's not the type of thing that breaks through with the typical resident when you're out at a restaurant. Lately, though, I've picked up a new habit, which is when I see an influencer or somebody who writes about restaurants, if they talk about anything on social media that sort of crosses into city public affairs, I go check the comments. And invariably, I see a lot of people who are suddenly able to invoke your name specifically. There's a rash of people saying mean things about you. And I get it comes with the territory. But you seem to have broken containment. This seems to be a level of dissatisfaction outside of the typical circles of City Hall, the lobbyists and nonprofit class, journalist class, regular people. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm willing to do tough things, and I'm willing to tell the public the truth. And they're probably not used to that. I think a lot of folks who've sat in this office have said, we'll reform pensions and we'll privatize city services, and that will solve this problem. Both of those things are not true. We've been willing to tackle difficult issues and implement them as best as we can against a backdrop of what has to be perhaps most difficult times politically that we've had. I was sworn in on Zoom because I became mayor during the middle of a pandemic where, people disagreed on what was the right way to get out of that situation against a backdrop of economic challenges that are in some cases temporary, like inflation, although that continues to be a bit of an issue, to things that are much more macro of, why do myself and my spouse both work, but we struggle to make ends meet when my parents didn't have the same challenge, to a president who is toxic, and his influence permeates the entirety of politics, to your point about not taking it personally, I don't, because it kind of comes with the territory. You're in charge of the city. You have to tell people often no, and that necessarily often makes about half of people pretty upset. I reflect on the quote that President Lyndon Johnson had in the depths of the Vietnam War, where he said, in the days in which the burdens of the presidency weigh heaviest on me, I always think it could be worse. I could be a mayor. That was said in the 1960s. So there's something about this work that kind of invites this. Yeah. And Andy, here's the thing. I love this city. I'm a third generation San Diegan. Everything I do is to try and make my hometown a better place. And yes, someone online may have their opinion that's informed largely by online posts, and they're welcome to have it. At the end of the day, my goal is to leave City Hall better than I found it. And when you consider that I took over with a significant budget deficit, vacant positions across the organization, we didn't have a chief operating officer, many of our department heads were gone. We didn't have an energy contract, we didn't have an ambulance contract. I mean, there are a host of things that I inherited that I immediately set about fixing, and then gone on to my agenda for building more housing, which yes, does make some people upset. Right. But you know what? When rents are flattening out or going down, I think that's a good thing. And I'm happy to be judged on a longer term, not on a weekly basis, but on a, hey, you know what? They got that right. Balboa Park looks better. Our city is better resourced. I'm able to find parking in downtown. These are things for which may not be readily apparent or immediately apparent, but you don't pay me to do the easy stuff. Folks need an adult that's in charge, that's willing to make the tough calls and move us forward. I believe that we're doing that, and I believe that in time, not on social media, but in time, that will be judged favorably. Last thing I will say is that you look across this country, and I'm the vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. In the current political environment, many of my colleagues have not been returned to office. I think about cities of San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Baton Rouge. These are places where colleagues of mine who were served in the same time frame I did were not returned to office. I was reelected with a 10-point margin. So while I would just say, don't get lost in the comments, Andy. Stay focused on what matters. And in the election, when people had another choice, that folks chose to stay with me.
President Trump has certainly, I imagine, changed quite a bit about your job in the last year and a half. If President Trump tried to redo Minneapolis and San Diego, do you have a plan for that?
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah.
Listen.
What is the the executive summary of the San Diego action plan if Operation Minneapolis comes here?
So the difficulty in answering that question is the only thing that is certain about this president is the uncertainty. What happened in Minneapolis could happen here, but I don't think it would happen quite the same way, right? And we had some experience with this, right? And I would argue and have argued that what happened in South Park in May of last year was a precursor or a testing ground for what later was seen in Los Angeles, Chicago, and ultimately in Minneapolis. What I have done is set out very clear expectations of city employees. We don't enforce immigration law. We will not assist in these efforts that the president is engaging in. Importantly, our training. We've had multiple training operations with relevant staff to try and game out, some of the worst case scenarios and how we might try and do better. Recognizing that as you started with the question, none of this is optimal. All of this is made hard. I'd rather us be talking about how we can reform our immigration system so that it works better for everybody. But instead, we're talking about a reactive situation where you could have federal agents in your city without any consultation, wreaking havoc. And we play out some of those scenarios, hoping that it'll never come, but that if it does, that we're prepared, recognizing, as I said, what happened in Minneapolis probably wouldn't happen quite the same way here, and we're gonna have to be nimble.
All right, we'll cut it off there. Mayor Gloria, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you live in San Diego, this June you'll be voting on a ballot measure called the Empty Homes Tax, which purports to levy a fee on certain homes that sit vacant. To find out more, I'm speaking today with the policy lead and co-author of the measure, Mayor Rosas. Thanks for joining us, Maya. Tell us, what does the Empty Homes Tax measure do?
The Empty Homes Tax is a ballot measure proposed by Councilmember Sean Ela Rivera. It's being proposed to address the cost of housing, corporate investment in our housing market, as well as bring in revenue to help San Diegans with the cost of living. Specifically, the Empty Homes Tax will tax empty homes that are not anyone's primary residence. They're not being rented out short-term or long-term, so they really are just sitting empty. And the proposal is to tax $8,000 per empty home annually, beginning in 2027, increasing every year after that. And then an additional $4,000 annual surcharge for corporate-owned empty homes.
Okay, that's very informative. So it sounds, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is this is only going to apply to empty homes that are people's second, third, fourth residences. So it's not a home that happens to be empty that someone owns as a primary residence. It's second, third, fourth homes, et cetera, like that. Okay. So I guess what I would like to know is, like, if you were to say what the primary problem this measure was trying to solve is it about making more housing stock available, or is it about raising revenue for the city? What's the main goal here?
Right, well, we are in a housing crisis. San Diego is way too expensive for most people to live here, and the primary driver of that is the cost of housing. We don't have enough homes in San Diego for all the San Diegans that live here and people who want to live here, and that's not okay. So San Diego has done a great job at incentivizing the construction of new homes, and that's fantastic. That's very needed, but that's not enough. We need a lot more strategies and tools available to make the cost of living more affordable and to bring more homes on the market. So with this ballot measure, if all 5,100 empty homes that exist in the city of San Diego came back on the market, they were rented to a San Diego family or sold and a family moved in, and there were no more empty homes, that would be a great outcome. And we don't expect that to actually be what happens. So any revenue that comes in is a plus. The city can use that to help fund rental assistance, for example, or other ways that we can help San Diegans afford to live here.
So is it safe to say this would just be another tool in the toolbox of creating more housing stock for people who actually live in San Diego? Is that right?
Exactly. There's currently 5,140 of these empty homes that are not being used for housing, and that's not okay. In a housing shortage, those homes should be used as housing.
Okay, so maybe you can give us a sense of how this will be enforced once it's on the books, if it does pass in June.
Yeah, that's a great question and an obvious question that we needed to address. So while I was helping to draft this measure with our city attorneys, we worked closely with the Treasurer's Office, which will be the department that enforces this and collects this tax, to make sure that they had all the tools available that they needed to make this enforceable and implementable. So that means that the Treasurer's Office will be able to audit homes they believe are second homes or empty homes, and there's the ability to impose penalties as well for anyone who's trying to get out of this. And to be clear, we know what homes are empty homes right now. The owners of these empty homes file paperwork under penalty of perjury with the city, declaring that these are homes that are not their primary residence and are not rented out short-term or long-term. So those are the homes that we will be looking at when this goes into effect, if passed by the voters.
Okay, so the mechanism to figure out what these houses are already exists in a sense, is that right?
Exactly.
So the blowback, such as it has existed so far, I think what I've heard some people say is like this is another squeeze on middle-class families in a time of increased fees, increased taxes. How do you respond to that specific criticism?
Well, most middle-class families I know don't own a second home. This will impact less than 1% of San Diegans, probably far less than 1% of San Diegans, and benefit 99% of San Diegans, because either there'll be more homes available to them, helping with the cost of rent, of housing across the board in San Diego, or there will be more revenue and more resources available for all San Diegans to help with the cost of living.
I do think it's somewhat dishonest for it to be framed as a squeezing of the middle class, because like you, I don't know too many middle class folks who own a second home in San Diego, which is one of the most expensive property markets in the country. It does seem a little bit discordant when people make that claim. Are there any exemptions to this measure?
We have come up with a lot of exemptions that we feel are fair and reasonable for families that may have a second home. For example, following the death of the owner, the family inherits the property. They get an exemption for up to 2 years while they figure out what they want to do with that. Active deployment, we have around 10 exemptions that we think are really fair.
No, that sounds reasonable to me. So when this came to a vote before the full council, it was passed 8-1. The lone dissenter was Councilman Raul Campillo. He claimed he was concerned about the potential legality of the measure. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. To the extent that I can speak to it, we are confident in the legality of this. We began working on this ballot measure in the summer, and the first thing we did when we began working on it was to make sure that the city attorney and ourselves felt confident bringing this forward. The city attorney's office brought in outside counsel that specializes in election law to review case law and the other similar ballot measures that are out there, and we believe that this is going to be successful.
And I guess I would ask, is there anything else a watcher at home who's deciding how to vote on this needs to know about this before they cast their ballot?
Sure. Empty second homes should be available for people to live in. Currently, people who own an empty second home, they don't pay their fair share. They don't pay any additional taxes for keeping a home vacant during a housing shortage and a housing crisis. The owner of these empty homes will have a choice. They can either use the house for housing, or they can pay a tax if they want to keep it empty. That's their choice, and either of those results is better than what we have right now.
That's fair. I've also heard folks say that their second homes, they have to pay property tax on. They're already paying taxes and fees on these homes. But, you know, I do think an important counterpoint to that is what you were saying. This is a genuine housing crisis in San Diego. It's existed for a while now. And while you may already pay property taxes on your second home, if you keep that home vacant, you're not really doing a service to the community in any meaningful way. It is important that we free up some of that housing stock. We kind of have to do an all-points bulletin effort here. You know, there's no easy way to just snap your fingers and solve the housing crisis. So I think this is a potentially very interesting measure, and I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today, Maya.
Thanks so much, Matt.
We're back, just me this time. Actually, team, can we get an image of Andy right here so I don't feel so lonely? We could put it in front of his little journalism award. Ah, perfect. Even better than the original. This is great. Okay. I'm sure you guys have a lot to say about Mayor Todd Gloria and the empty homes measure. Please let us know in the comments. We want to hear from you. We strongly encourage comments, and we read every comment you guys leave. I think this is a pretty interesting episode. We very much hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you'll be back again soon. Until next time, look after one another and be kind.